Hey guys, Burly Teacher. Hey, I just want to start out this week's episode by giving a shout out to my third block. They've made it one of their goals to try and help me get 100 subscribers by the end of the semester. So thanks guys for that. And just take this time to thank everybody that's watching. Thank everybody that is subscribed. Thank everybody that's liking and commenting. You know, I'm over 100 subscribers now, hey, which is a good thing. Apparently only 1% of YouTubers ever make it that far. So thanks guys, wouldn't be possible without you. So this week's episode is part 2 of Life Isn't Fair, episode 16. So last week we did a lot of talking about situation where my wife and I were struggling having kids, and we left off with all of the problems and the miscarriages and all of that, basically learning that having a kid is a privilege and not a right, to making the decision we made. So I want to go into this week and talk about what happened next. But if you didn't watch episode 1, I want you to watch it here. I'll put the link down there below so you guys can take a look at it before you watch part 2. So for those of you that don't already know, the decision that Sarah and I first made, or at least wanted to research and try and figure out, is through adoption. So Sarah did a lot of research. She went online and found a bunch of agencies that we could potentially adopt from and get some information from. We called a bunch, we emailed a bunch, and believe it or not, hardly any of them responded back to us, which sort of put us off a little bit. Somehow Sarah got into contact with an agency in who we sat down with. Really nice lady, came out and talked to us, and that's where we started thinking that maybe fostering would be for us, with the thought in the back of our head that fostering would lead to a higher likelihood of being able to have a kid at a younger age. So you know, it's a long process, fostering, and you know, in part 2 I'll try to do my best to explain all of it without blabbering on too much. But we decided that fostering was going to be for us. So the first step that prospective foster parents need to do is you need to get licensed to become a foster parent. The first part of that is going to your training. And there are 10 classes from a series called Pride. And I'm going to be quite honest. Being a teacher, the class wasn't very helpful. For the most part, you know, common sense, right? Things that I guess aren't common sense to all, because obviously there's been foster parents that have done bad things, right? And I'll get to that a little bit later in another episode, right? But you go to these classes with your spouse or with your partner, whoever you're going with, and basically social workers sit down and talk to you about examples and then, you know, training. So once you're done with all the Pride training, then comes into the phase where you get a home study done. And in that home study they do all kinds of things, right? They check to make sure that your well is safe. They check to make sure that the temperature of your water is good and that your house is suitable and that the rooms are a correct size. Yep, the rooms have to be a correct size, right? And based on how many kids you want, we were okay with going up to 2. And we wanted, I believe at the beginning, Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong again, our idea was between 0 to 6, right, is the age groups that we wanted to have, right? Really we only wanted 1 to start, right? Once the home study is done, then you get cleared, you got to get fingerprints, you got to go through FBI checks, you got to do all of that stuff, right? And it took us about 6 months before we even got a call for potential of having kids, right? And you know, this was a period of time where we were hoping we were getting kids. We were waiting, you know, by the phone, so to speak. We really weren't waiting by the phone, but all of a sudden one day I get a call from our social worker, and the social worker says, Josh, Sarah, we have 2 kids. We have a blonde-haired girl that's 4, and we have a little 3-year-old boy that looks like he's Mexican. That's exactly what they told us. They said, we're going to give you a half hour to decide, and we need to know at the end of that half hour, because what was in the process of happening is the kids were being taken out of a home in an emergency, that they needed a place to live that night. And most of the times that's how this situation works. Kids are being immediately taken out of the home by social workers, CSB, all of those that are involved. and they need to get them out of there fairly quickly. So Sarah and I said, I guess it's game time. About an hour later, 2 kids show up. And this is the point where we're like, crap. It's a lot like I remember my first class ever teaching. I remember having this vivid moment where I'm like, you know what? College didn't prepare me at all for this moment. For this moment when you got 30 people staring at you and you're responsible for teaching. That was a lot like the moment when we had these kids were like, we had, our house was ready, our car were ready, we had the seats, everything was good to go, we had beds, we had dressers, we had clothes, we had games, we had all of that stuff, but that doesn't prepare you for the moment. But we have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we're like, we've never watched kids TV, what do we watch? And you probably wouldn't be surprised to know that when they first got here, what they watched mostly was SpongeBob. And for about a day or two, we watched SpongeBob and Hello Kitty, and then Sarah and I looked at each other and we said, absolutely not, we're not going to watch these shows anymore because they're absolutely silly. So we had a lot of learning to do, and I can only, at that point, I was more selfishly thinking about me and how, I know for me personally, Sarah can speak for herself, that, I'm like, holy crap, we're parents now, how are we going to do this, what are we going to do? And it was quite a trying time. And it's not till just, after the kids were gone that I really didn't sit back and think, what are they thinking? And I'll get into their story as much as I possibly can without giving information away that would sort of put Sarah and I in jeopardy for giving too much private information away. But it was... looking back on it, I can only imagine how scary it must have been for them. Our foster home was not the first foster home that they were in. They were in a foster home previously to us, and there's an investigation going into the previous foster parents, and they were removed from the foster parents, right? So that'll give you a little inclination of, and it's at this point where I want to sort of take a step back and explain, when you're a foster parent, it's going to be a very rare occasion where you're going to get kids that are going to be, normal, happy-go-lucky kids. They're going to be very shy. They're going to be very withheld because they don't know you, right? They're coming into your house with, literally, they came with just what they had on their body because it was an emergency situation. And then, as the process goes through, like you see in movies, like you see in shows, they legitimately came with black plastic bags. And it's sad that, their entire life was summed up into a plastic bag, that had their contents in it. And when we got a lot of the stuff, to be quite honest, isn't anything that we wanted to have in our house as far as cleanliness goes. And we had most of the stuff already as far as that goes. So they came in, and we're sort of sitting staring at each other at the end of the night like, whew, what did we get ourselves into? They came just at about dinner time, so there wasn't much that we really could do with them other than put a couple shows on, give them a bath. And I guess this is at another point when you get your first foster kids, there's tons of paperwork, there's tons of communication between your social worker and you about what happens at home, what happens at school, what happens in daycare if you choose to put them in daycare, which we did not. But the first thing we had to do in giving them a bath, and it's important to note that in any potential foster situation, it's probably never a good idea for the foster dad to be anywhere in and around the bathroom with the girl. For whatever past history may have happened, it just was something Sarah and I decided that I would never do. And if Sarah was gone, it was one of those things where, I would go in and help. She'd have clothes on. I'd ask her if she needed help. Because, when they left, they were fully competent in doing everything on their own. But that first night, we had a sheet of paper. And on that sheet of paper, we were to note any bruises and cuts and scrapes that they had all over their body that we would report back to the social workers. And there was in the previous foster home some issues where that came into play. So I'll sort of end here with this for this week because there's so much we can talk about, and it's really hard for me to even put it into a sense. So I'm going sort of chronologically for how things happened. That first night, we put the kids to bed, and it actually was pretty seamless as far as putting them to bed. Sarah and I go sit out on the couch, and we're pooped. We're dog tired at that point mentally, not so much physically, but mentally. And in that first couple nights, she was out like a light, but he was crying and screaming at the top of his lungs. It was part of that separation anxiety, the things that they talk about in the classes that you need to be prepared for. Probably, I don't know how long it really was. I may be exaggerating, maybe 2-3 hours. He was just up crying. We couldn't console him, right? He wouldn't let us love him. He wouldn't let us hug him. It was just part of the separation anxiety that he had, and he was learning how to deal with it in a crazy situation. So, you know, that's already a bunch of time for today. What I want to tell you guys is that, you know, life isn't fair, isn't meant to be for just Sarah and I. Life isn't fair is also to the kids that have to be involved in these situations. They don't get to choose what's happening in their life. They don't get to choose their circumstances. So, you know, I want you to keep that in mind the entire time, that life isn't fair just isn't for us as the adults. It's mainly for the kids and what they have to endure and go through in these situations. So I want you to keep that in mind. You know, and if you're a religious person, say a prayer tonight for all those kids that are in foster care, for all those kids that are in foster care and about ready to get adopted, which is a happy point in their life, for all the kids that are getting taken away from their parents, their biological parents tonight, and going to the foster home for the first time. So, you know, if we can do that, that's sort of the message for today, is that let's take a step back from where we are as adults and think about what these kids have to go through. So part 2, hopefully it's living up to expectation. Hopefully this is keeping your attention to come back for part 3, and then we'll sort of continue on with what fostering is like for, you know, foster parents, for the kids, for the family of the foster parents, and all of that stuff. So enjoy your week, guys. Burly Teacher out, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.